Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's St Andrew's Day, the 30th of November. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 280 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will discuss today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. The EU will try to set up a court backed by the UN to investigate and prosecute war crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine, according to the European Commission's President, Ursula von der Leyen. In a video statement, she said, "Russia's invasion of Ukraine has brought death, devastation, and unspeakable suffering. We all remember the horrors of Bucha. It is estimated that more than 20,000 civilians and more than 100,000 Ukrainian military officers have been killed so far." Moscow has promoted the chief engineer of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, Yuri Chernychuk, to become its head, according to Russia's nuclear agency, Rosenergoatom. This morning, Alexander Staruk, the head of the Zaporizhia Regional Military Administration, said that Russian strikes in the region overnight had hit a gas distribution point, causing a fire that has since been extinguished. Ukraine claims to have killed another 500 Russian soldiers in the last 24 hours, bringing the total it says have died in combat since 24th of February to about 88,880. The General Staff of the Armed Forces said it had taken out 3 more tanks and another 6 armoured personnel carriers. Ukrainian forces have also downed 3 Russian reconnaissance drones in the last 24 hours, according to its armed forces. 5 Ukrainian civilians were killed by Russian forces on Tuesday, according to Kyrylo Tymoshenko, the deputy head of the president's office. Others were wounded in the Kharkiv, Kherson, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, has said that Russia will focus on nuclear arms infrastructure in 2023, including facilities to accommodate new missile systems. The UK Ministry of Defence has highlighted Russia's new Foreign Agents Act in its daily update, which the MOD says will be used to crack down on critics and dissidents, which will allow their personal details, including their addresses, of designated foreign agents to be published, meaning that they could become targets of harassment. The European Commission gave an update on Wednesday on its plans to freeze and confiscate Russian assets. Ukraine's supplies of spare parts for its battered electricity grid are running out amid sustained Russian bombing. European companies are being asked to urgently donate surplus equipment to help the country get through the winter. The former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev, has warned NATO against providing Ukraine with Patriot missile defense systems and called the alliance a criminal entity. And Ukrainian forces struck a power plant in multiple attacks on Russia's Kursk region on Tuesday, causing some electricity outages, the local governor said. Now, we're lucky enough this evening to be joined by Maureen Watt, who's a retired politician and a former Minister for Mental Health in the Scottish Government. Maureen served as a regional MSP for North East Scotland from 2006 until 2011, and was then the member of our Scottish Parliament representing the constituency of Aberdeen South and North Kincardine from 2011 to 2021, when she retired. Maureen has also been a teacher and a counsellor, amongst many other roles. Maureen, good evening. How are you keeping?
Good evening, Andrew, and happy St Andrew's Day, and it's good to be with you again.
Well, thank you for joining us, and a very happy St Andrew's Day to you too, Maureen. Our first story this evening is that UK food price inflation hit a new high of 12.4% in November as the price of basics such as eggs, dairy products and coffee shot up. Fresh foods led the increase in prices, with inflation rising to 14.3% from 13.3% in October, with rises expected to continue into next year, according to the latest data from the British Retail Consortium trade body, which represents most big retailers, and the market research firm Nielsen IQ. Overall shop price inflation rose to 7.4% in November from 6.6% in the previous month, a level not seen since at least 2005, as items such as sports equipment also jumped in price. The rise in the cost of essentials is likely to hit poorer households hardest, many of which are already struggling with higher energy bills as they have fewer options to make cutbacks or savings. Those on higher incomes are able to offset inflation to some extent by reining in spending on non-essentials, such as meals out and holidays, and switching to cheaper products by shopping at discounters such as Aldi and Lidl, or buying the big supermarkets' own label goods. Retail bosses said that the cost of Christmas would be higher this year, despite a wave of discounts aimed at encouraging an uptick in spending during the final month of the year, when most businesses make the majority of their profits. So, Maureen, Andrew Bailey, who's the governor of the Bank of England, said higher inflation was hitting lower income households harder because a bigger proportion of their spending goes on essentials such as food and energy. He said inflation is bad for the least well off generally, and this inflation is particularly bad. The reason is that it's concentrated on food and energy, and these are the essentials of living. So, Maureen, if Andrew Bailey is saying that the impact is particularly bad on the least well off, what do you think multimillionaire Rishi Sunak should be doing?
Well, I mean, I think Andrew Bailey is perhaps stating the obvious, and as you said, because energy prices are higher and food prices are higher, that's obviously going to be what most people spend their money on first, and is absolutely essential, things that you cannot really and shouldn't be having to do without. And even within the foods that are where the prices are rising most, it is on very basics like pasta and rice and um, foods that are absolutely essential. You know, it's not the more expensive things that you can possibly do without. So it is really, really bleak, and we're not even at midwinter. And I think people are just, I feel they're just trying to get to Christmas now and then just expect really bit bleak January and February. And I wonder too, in what you were saying, Andrew, of whether people will hold off shopping to see if things will come right down the nearer we get to Christmas, when retailers see that things aren't actually leaving their shelves, and there might be more discounting the closer we get to Christmas. For example, you know, there's supposed to be a shortage of turkeys. Is everybody just going to hold off buying turkeys? Some people do already, and wait till the very last minute. I mean, literally the day before, to see if they're heavily discounted then. So I feel for everybody on low incomes and also retailers who are having a particularly hard time.
Well, that's absolutely right, Maureen. Helen Dickinson, who's the chief executive of the British Retail Consortium, who I mentioned, said that cost pressures for retailers may ease next year, reducing pressure on prices for shoppers at that stage. But she said Christmas cheer will be dampened this year as households cut back on seasonal spending in order to prioritise the essentials. Almost all households, maybe apart from number 10, will be cutting back on seasonal spending, but that really rather misses the point. People are having to cut back on eating and heating, the very essentials of living. So we also heard that winter looks increasingly bleak as pressures on prices continue unabated. We mentioned there the price of meat, eggs and dairy, which have been hit by rocketing energy costs and the rising cost of animal feed and transport. And coffee prices shot up last month as high input costs filtered through to price tags. Have you, if you have any responsibility for the weekly shop in the Watt household, what have you been noticing, or what have your friends or your neighbours been talking about to you?
Well, I've just come back from a shop about half an hour ago, and I noticed there weren't any eggs at all. Now, I didn't have time to look to see if they were in another place, but I thought the whole shelves, from top to bottom, where the eggs usually are, was completely blank, completely empty. So I don't know if, because, you know, even although the prices are still going up, we're also being hit by avian flu and the effect of that, where some mass herds of poultry have had to be culled. So I wonder if that was having an effect, perhaps. Where I shop gets them from a supplier that's been hit. I don't know. So it just seems, disaster upon disaster at the moment
It,
for some farmers, and it's really quite bleak. Farmers do come to a point where they think, will I continue to produce what I'm producing? So for my family went out of dairy farming because it just was no longer viable unless
yep.
you expanded grossly and had huge herds, but you need the acreage to sustain that. So um, in the long term, if there are fewer and fewer suppliers, then the prices go up because of that. So we're really not in a good position at all. And, really the government aren't taking the radical measures that need to be taken in order to sort this out.
Absolutely, Maureen. Thank you. And yes, I'm sure I saw reporting today that more than half the turkeys in the turkey flock in the UK have already had to be destroyed as a result of avian flu. Uh, having spoken about that story, I'm going to divert a little bit. We've just received a press statement, which I think we can cover just now, and I'd be interested to get your response to it, Maureen. The SNP has welcomed a new Redfield and Wilson strategies poll showing yes 4 points ahead on the constitutional question. That's just 1 week on from the Supreme Court ruling. The poll shows a majority for yes in every age group under the age of 65, with a majority of 52% supporting independence when excluding don't knows. The SNP Deputy Leader, Keith Brown MSP, said, "This poll shows growing support for what the people of Scotland expressed in the 2021 election. They want a choice to become an independent nation." The chaos at Westminster in recent months has tanked the UK economy, accelerated inflation, and crippled the household budgets with soaring mortgages, all from successive Tory governments that Scotland didn't elect. He continued, "Last week's ruling showed clearly that the UK is not a voluntary union. In a democracy, it is right for the people to have their say, and neither the Tories or Labour should be able to deny that. The message to Westminster parties now is clear: Scottish democracy cannot be denied." So, Maureen, just quickly, what's your response to this Redfield and Wilton Strategies poll, which shows yes now 4 points ahead on the constitutional question, just 1 week on from the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, I must say I've never heard of that polling organisation before. Maybe you have, Andrew, but um, it's very very encouraging, and I think the unionists must be really really despondent on that, because I'm sure they were thinking, oh well, if the SNP and the independence movement have been had the referendum rejected by the Supreme Court, it's never going to happen, and we might as well just forget about independence. But clearly, this poll shows the opposite, and that's really pleasing. And the fact that it's for independence in all the age groups apart from mine, then again, that is really, really encouraging. And, while young folk might not be active in political parties, they're clearly among their mates talking about this, and all believe that the way future is independence. And I think that's what more and more people are realising, that there is an alternative way to what Labour and Tories are offering us from Westminster, a radical departure from the way that they're handling the economy now. It doesn't need to be like this. And people are realising that the only way that they can get that different way is with independence. So that's really encouraging.
Thanks, Maureen. And just your own thoughts in terms of, we saw 15 protests across Scotland last Wednesday and 6 in Europe in support of independence. Obviously, we're coming into December, the darkest month, and political campaigning is not easy in Scotland in December. It's dark most of the time and usually raining horizontally. My question was, what would you like to see from the independence movement, either through December or more likely in the early stages of 2023?
Well, I think there's an opportunity to think about how we want to go forward. I think it's absolutely vital to keep the momentum going, but I think we need to be very careful about what our strategies are. And let's remember, Andrew, it's not just the SNP, and the SNP, while leaders of the independence movement, we wouldn't be where we are if it wasn't for the Scottish National Party and being in government. Other people can lead the independence movement, and the more groups and people leading their own groups and helping persuade their own um, constituencies. By that I mean whether it's Women for Independence or health workers for independence or pensioners for independence. It's really important to keep the momentum and the work going. But I think now people are so angry that there will be different methods used, I think, for getting the message across that independence is the answer to our woes.
Thank you,
And
Maureen.
self-determination is really important. It's not just the current woes, it's the fact that self-determination and Scotland, recognition that Scotland is a nation and should be able to govern itself is really important.
Completely. Thank you, Maureen. As I say, that was a story that broke after we came on air, so I'm grateful to you for reacting to it and responding and helping us with the story. But let's move on now, because the operators of the UK's local energy networks will be forced to spend more of their profits on investing to future-proof the electricity grid after their regulator, Ofgem, said it would not allow any further rises in household bills. In a new set of price controls that will run from 2023 to 2028, the energy watchdog said it would keep costs to customers unchanged. Unions and consumer groups criticised the network operating companies for not reducing domestic bills as households struggle with the rising cost of energy. Customers now pay about £100 a year in network charges on their bills, which allow firms to invest in improvements. Ofgem also ensures the work is funded by limiting network profits and demanding efficiencies from firms. Ofgem also said that companies must invest heavily in the grid to make them ready for the added demand expected as more homes and businesses opt for electric cars and electric heating, and more wind farms are connected to the grid. To do this, they will have to invest a larger portion of profits and also slash operating costs. The companies affected include Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, Northern Power Grid, SP Energy Networks, Electricity North West, the National Grid, and UK Power Networks. The changes, which come into force from the 1st of April 2023, mean that companies can invest £22.2 billion of customer money in the network. That's £3 billion less than had been requested by the firms, an increase that would have added a few pounds to everyone's annual bills. However, the new rules allow spending to reach 6% higher than Ofgem's draft decisions made earlier this year in June. Ofgem also increased the cost of equity, that's the return that networks are allowed to make on their investments, from the draft proposal level of 4.75% to 5.23%. So, Maureen, in a new set of price controls that will run from 2023 to 2028, the Energy Watchdog said it would keep costs to customers unchanged, which means unchanged from their current levels. That's not good enough, surely. God, that's not good enough during a cost of living crisis, is it?
No, you would wonder why the standing charges need to go up, especially when the cost of the units of energy is going up so much. You would think the companies would be doing everything in their power, excuse the pun, to keep the costs, the fixed costs for customers down. But I was just thinking while you were explaining all that, Andrew, that this is really Ofgem tinkering at the edges as usual, rather than root and branch reform of that Ofgem really needs to be doing in terms of energy supply. It's ridiculous still that energy from the north of Scotland has to pay, Scotland in general has to pay to go into the grid, while Cornwall gets paid for energy that goes into the grid, and in no way recognises where renewable energy is coming from in terms of the vast amounts that is coming from Scotland through onshore and offshore wind, and even in Scotland, solar energy and also the hydro energy that we've had for decades. So while Ofgem seems to be, telling the energy supply companies to do things differently, and also to, I welcome the fact that they're asking them to spend more on the grid. During Storm Arwen that we had this time last year, outages in the northeast of Scotland were particularly bad and for particularly long times. So it really is important that the grid is upgraded so that people don't experience that again.
Completely. Thank you, Maureen. Let's move on now, because conditions for small boat arrivals at the Manston Reception Centre in Kent have sparked international concern and triggered a rapid reaction visit from European torture monitors in the last few days. A 7-strong delegation from the Council of Europe's Prevention of Torture and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment Committee carried out a rapid reaction visit to Manston from November the 25th to the 28th due to concerns over the conditions there. They have presented their preliminary findings to the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, and to Donald Smith, the clandestine Channel Command Director of Operations. A Council of Europe spokesperson said visits in such circumstances are relatively rare. Manston, a Ministry of Defence site in Ramsgate, has been beset by a series of scandals, including a diphtheria outbreak, drug use by guards on the site, and asylum seekers being removed from the site and dumped in central London. Manston was initially intended to hold a maximum of 1,600 people, but at one point accommodated 4,000, with many staying considerably longer than the 24-hour legal time limit. Manston was emptied last week, but it is thought to be operational again after 884 people arrived on 17 boats on Tuesday. The Home Office has faced criticism from multiple inspectors, including HM Inspector of Prisons and the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, along with parliamentarians. NGOs have called for an independent investigation to examine everything that has gone wrong at Manston. And to add to the Home Office's woes, the chair of the Independent Monitoring Boards, Anne Owers, has written to the chairs of 4 parliamentary select committees, including the Home Affairs Select Committee, outlining her deep concerns over the squalid conditions at Manston. Now, Maureen, in an article in the British Medical Journal about the diphtheria outbreak at Manston, it was reported that the Association of Directors of Public Health said that offers of assistance from public health officials were rejected by the Home Office. Jim McManus, who's the president of the Association of Directors of Public Health, said there had been no response from the Home Office to its offers of help. So it struck me that's probably the standard Home Office approach, isn't it? It sounds to me like they were determined that Manston would be the epitome of a hostile environment.
That's absolutely scandalous if that's the case, that the Home Office has rejected help from public health. I mean, diphtheria is an extremely serious illness. It's been eradicated in the UK, and for it to reappear is absolutely scandalous. But if anything shows how broken the Westminster system is, it is the work of the Home Office, or the lack of work in the Home Office. They really seem totally and utterly dysfunctional. The fact that there are more boats crossing the Channel since Brexit than before Brexit is an absolute scandal. And even paying the French millions and going to work with the French doesn't seem to have managed to stop the boats. They really do not know what to do. And, since we're needing people to work in the UK, because part of the decline, or the recession and the decline in growth, is because of a lack of personnel, surely there must be a way to get this done properly, to process asylum seekers as quickly as possible. If they are not immediately going to be returned, then let them get to work. And those who, after all the scrutiny that they go through, and it's far too rigorous and keeps them waiting for so long, either in detention centres or awaiting clearance to remain. I mean, I honestly do not understand why some common sense doesn't prevail in that department. And the Home Office, under now successive Home Secretaries, is completely and utterly useless. It's a laughing stock. And the fact that European monitors are coming is so embarrassing.
As you say, Maureen, it appears that the Home Office is not fit for purpose. Now, I was going to talk to you about the fact that campaigners have rebranded Manston as the Suella Braverman Centre for Cruelty to Refugees. However, time is against us this evening, so we'll move on to the next story. But I'm pretty confident that you and I will be talking about Manston and talking about the dysfunction in the Home Office again very soon.
Mm.
Our next story this evening is that a member of the Buckingham Palace household has resigned and apologised after a black guest at a reception hosted by the Queen Consort was left feeling traumatised and violated after allegedly being questioned repeatedly by a royal aide about where her people came from. Ngozi Fulani, the founder of the charity Sister Space, which provides support for African and Caribbean heritage women affected by abuse, claimed the aide moved her hair to reveal her name badge. She was then persistently questioned over where her people came from, despite having said she was a British national. The encounter, which took place on Tuesday at a Violence Against Women and Girls reception, was witnessed by two other women, Mandu Reid, the leader of the Women's Equality Party, who is a mixed-race heritage, and another black female charity representative. Buckingham Palace launched an immediate investigation, describing the remarks as unacceptable and deeply regrettable. The aide concerned has offered her profound apologies for hurt caused and has resigned her position with immediate effect. Ms. Fulani wrote on Twitter, mixed feelings about yesterday's visit to Buckingham Palace. 10 minutes after arriving, a member of staff approached me, moved my hair to see my name badge. The conversation then took place. The rest of the event is a blur. Mandu Reid was one of two people who witnessed the encounter, and she said it left them shell-shocked. She described the encounter as almost like an interrogation. She added, "We were pretty stunned. I couldn't believe I'd been invited to this reception. I was there to celebrate people who work towards ending violence against women and girls. We were guests. We're not trespassers. We were made to feel, in a way, like trespassers." So, Maureen, it's not the first time that the Royal Institution has faced claims of racism. In their interview with Oprah Winfrey, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex made claims of racism against the family, which were then denied by Prince William. So are the events that are reported to have taken place on Tuesday, is this just more evidence of the same issue in Buckingham Palace?
I think, regrettably, it is. And you would have thought that everybody in Buckingham Palace who is meeting guests would by now have been on a racial discrimination course to make sure that they don't do this. But, you know, you can maybe forgive an 80-year-old woman for asking that question initially. But to repeatedly go on and see that the woman being asked was not responding and clearly getting more and more distressed is utterly despicable. I mean, how insensitive can you be? And it's not as if, you know, the members of the royal family and ladies in waiting who are also going to be at the event do not get lists of participants and the organisations that they belong to. And there's plenty other things to talk about than where you come from. You know, it's just absolutely unforgivable. And I'm very glad that she has resigned. I know I've heard that the Queen Consort doesn't want ladies in waiting anymore and wants a more informal arrangement. And hopefully this will be the start of removing people who hold such awful views and awful behaviour.
Thank you, Maureen. Let's move away from Buckingham Palace now, because the European Commission wants to freeze more than 13 billion euros, that's about 11 billion pounds, of EU funds for Hungary over concerns about democratic weaknesses and failures to tackle corruption. The proposals, which have still to be approved by EU member states, mark a decisive moment in the Commission's battle with the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban over the rule of law. The EU executive proposed in September suspending €7.5 billion in economic development funds for Hungary, as it feared that Orban's government could not guarantee proper use and oversight of the money. Budapest had until the 19th of November to implement 17 remedial measures, including setting up an anti-corruption task force and tightening rules against conflicts of interest in the award of public funds. The European Commissioner in charge of the EU budget, Johannes Hahn, told reporters on Wednesday that Budapest had unfortunately not implemented the remedial measures, so he could not say that the risks have gone away, although he added that Hungary was moving in the right direction. Separately, while the Commission approved Hungary's long-delayed €5.8 billion COVID recovery plan on Wednesday, it said no money should be released until Budapest hit 27 super milestones that include securing the independence of the Supreme Court, the Curia, and increasing the powers of the National Judicial Council, a self-governing body whose members were recently attacked by pro-government media. The 27 super milestones include the 17 remedial measures against corruption. If the recovery plan has not been endorsed by the end of the year, Hungary stands to lose billions. And EU officials think that they have a unique moment to push Orban for reform, as the Hungarian economy falters, increasing the country's need for funds. But officials are also wary, noting that Orban, who's been in power since 2010, has previously promised changes while continuing to increase government control over the judiciary, restrict independent media, and loosen checks on cronyism and corruption. So, Maureen, if the recovery plan has not been endorsed by the end of the year, Hungary stands to lose billions of euros. Do you think, is Viktor Orban going to thumb his nose at the EU?
I'm afraid he probably will. I think that's the measure of the man and his cronies who are in government at the moment. And unfortunately, it's the population who suffers if EU funds are not forthcoming and they're being siphoned away through corruption. I mean, Hungary isn't the only country in Europe where corruption is totally blighting the economy. Italy is getting worse, I think, and Greece has overtaken Italy in terms of growth. And we all remember how the EU had to step in Greece. So I do think that the EU needs to be very, very have great supervision on the funds of taxpayers from other countries and money going there. And it's a very difficult one as to whether Orban will let the necessary scrutiny of funds by the EU happen. But I think sanctions over funding is perhaps one of the only ways that a country under a president like Orban is likely to change, and we have to they have to monitor closely if these changes are in fact being made, and the threat of sanctions is perhaps one of the few ways that we can see change in that country to the benefit of its citizens.
Thank you, Maureen. And in terms of looking at the background or the wider context to the events taking place between Brussels and Budapest, Hungary's government has angered neighbours and alienated allies over its sharp criticism of EU's sanctions against Russia. And Hungary has threatened to veto €18 billion in funds for Ukraine. So is that what's going on in the background here? Russia is attacking the cohesion of the EU using Viktor Orban?
Yes, I think that's been pretty obvious from early days of the war in Ukraine that Orban hasn't been critical of Putin. And, you know, you can't work both. You either have got to decide that you're a full member of the EU and accept the principles of the EU, or you support Putin. And, you know, Hungary needs to decide. And of course, it's not up to Orban, it's up to the citizens. I really don't know why he was elected again, unless, of course, the election was full of corruption. But, there needs to be radical changes in Hungary if it's going to remain a full member of the EU.
Thank you, Maureen. And let's come back to Scotland now for our next story, because the gross misconduct proceedings against police officers should be allowed to continue after they resign from the force in order to promote transparency and to maintain public confidence, and that's according to a public consultation. The move, which would see proceedings continue even if an officer leaves during the course of an investigation into their conduct, was among the recommendations of Dame Ailish Angiolini's independent review into how police complaints and allegations of misconduct should be handled. There was also broad public support for a statutory ethical code for officers, a requirement for the police to participate openly and promptly in investigations, and for enhanced powers for the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Veterans, Keith Brown MSP, said, "I hugely value the exceptional commitment of Scotland's dedicated police officers and the valued work they do every day to keep our communities safe. The policing by consent model that is such a credit to the service can only work where there is trust and confidence in the way officers carry out their duties. In the very small minority of incidents that do require investigation, this should be done in an open and transparent way that also respects the rights of the police concerned. We will carefully consider all of the consultation responses to help us shape improvements to Scotland's system of police complaints and misconduct handling." So, Maureen, Keith Brown there was saying that the policing by consent model that is such a credit to the service can only work where there is trust and confidence in the way that officers carry out their duties. So do you think at the moment, is there still policing by consent in Scotland?
Yes, I do. Yes, unequivocally. I think there's policing by consent in Scotland. The only reason that it might not be, apart from, as you said, some isolated incidents, the Shikobayo case is one, but is the undermining of police in general by what's happening in the Met and other forces in England, where there isn't the same policing by consent at all. And I think police in Scotland have to be commended by the changes that they have made so that we get policing by consent and we get communities in the main working with the police and people working with the police rather than against them. And we can think decades past of how that wasn't the case. When you think of the situation of the gangs in Scotland and the way that was turned around through policing by consent is a model that is being looked at and replicated, and people come here from all over the world to see how we've done it. It isn't easy, but it is well worth sticking at. However, I think the proposals in this publication I haven't seen or read, but I think they're worth looking at because, police can always get another job in security, particularly, or whatever. And I think it is important that the individual is pursued when complaints are made against them, even after they resign, because resigning from the police force is quite an easy option to take if you think that you're guilty and won't be pursued further if you resign.
I was going to ask you that, Maureen. As you were saying, gross misconduct proceedings against police officers should be allowed to continue after they resign from the force in order to promote transparency and maintain public confidence, according to the responses to this public consultation. That sounds like a bit of a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, given the kind of unique position of police, and as I say, they may go on into other places where they feel that they can assert their authority, if you like. So I think it's certainly something that I hope Keith Brown and the Justice portfolio will look into further and see what can reasonably and fairly be done. But you can't just be let off just because you resign from your job.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maureen. We'll move on again now because people who receive Scottish Child Payment and qualify for Best Start Grant, early learning and school age payments will be paid them automatically from this week without the need to apply for them separately. Social Security Scotland will notify clients by SMS when they are checking eligibility for Best Start grants, and if they are eligible, will write to advise them of the payment. The move to automatic awards means less paperwork for tens of thousands of families and ensures that families automatically receive the support to which they are entitled. It builds on work already completed to make applying for our 5 family payments as simple as possible. It includes the ability to apply for all children in a household on a single form. The Minister for Social Security, Ben McPherson, MSP, said, "Our extension to the Scottish Child Payment and its increase to £25 per child per week has been widely welcomed and will make significant difference to families across the country. The increase represents a rise of 150% in just 8 months. Tackling child poverty is a key mission for the Scottish Government," he continued, "and automating payments, where we have the information we need to do so, will mean parents and carers automatically get the financial support they are eligible for paid directly to them." So, Maureen, the CEO of One Parent Families Scotland, Satwat Rahman, said, "We are delighted that Social Security Scotland has made changes so that parents who have applied for and receive the Scottish Child Payment will no longer have to fill out separate forms to receive other family benefits. Reducing unnecessary bureaucracy and hurdles to application sounds like a good thing to me. What do you think?"
Yes, absolutely. And you remember the Scottish excuse me, the Scottish government was criticised for taking so long to set up the social security system. And I think, excuse me, in the end, it was well worthwhile to make a system that can then be trusted to do this and send out the other payments, and without folk having to apply every single time. Um, People are under huge stress anyway. People who are, you know, needing social security benefits, and to get them without applying is really, really a good move.
Yep. Thanks, Maureen. Take a moment and get a glass of water, please. You've got something stuck there. Have a wee moment. Uh, I was going to also then ask Maureen, and I was going to quote the Minister for Social Security, Ben McPherson, who said that tackling child poverty is a key mission for the Scottish Government. And I was wondering whether voters understand or value that tackling child poverty is not a key mission in Westminster. And I was going to wonder why Westminster does not invest in all our futures by reducing child poverty. So, Maureen, are you okay?
I think so. Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
As long as you're okay. So, do you think voters understand or value that tackling child poverty is something that the Scottish Government is focusing on, but it's clearly not a key mission in Westminster? I'm thinking in particular of the autumn statement from the Chancellor, which said nothing at all about children and families.
Yes, but it's not something that the Scottish Government should have to be doing, is righting the wrongs of the Westminster government. There's plenty of other things that we could be doing with that money, but that is something that the Scottish government has focused on. And we've talked before about the huge inequality in wealth in the UK, and if we saw some redistribution of wealth, then we wouldn't need to be doing this. But I think it's absolutely, totally commendable that the Scottish government is focusing on children and child poverty and helping the worst of families, because if you're blighted by poverty in the initial stages of your life, then it's very difficult to get over that in later life, and it blights you for years and years in your life. So I commend the Scottish Government on doing this and making it easier for people to um, get these payments.
Thanks, Maureen. As you say, the payments to which these people are entitled. And for our final item, we'll come back to, we'll stay in Scotland and we'll look at the fishing industry, because fishing businesses and marine organisations in Scotland's coastal communities will benefit from Marine Fund Scotland's latest round of funding. A total of 60 projects which contribute to innovative and sustainable practices, minimise carbon emissions and support coastal communities, and they will receive grants ranging from £7,000 to £1.2 million. Projects include modernising a salmon and trout processing facility in order to reduce energy and water use, installation of solar panels at a seafood cold store to cut back on its carbon footprint, and process capacity building for a shellfish producer to meet the growing demand from premium markets in the US and Asia. Announcing the recipients of the fund during a visit to a shellfish processing facility in Bells Hill, the Rural Affairs Secretary, Mary Gudgeon, said, "I'm very pleased for these organisations and individuals whose applications have been successful this year. Marine Fund Scotland has enabled some really exciting projects in the past, and I'm confident that this round of funding will play an important role in continuing to help our marine and fisheries businesses to develop and to move to the next level." So, Maureen, how are you doing? Are you okay?
Yes, I think so. We'll get
Oh,
there.
that's grand. So long as you're okay, that's the most important thing. So I had a look at the list of recipients from this latest funding round from Marine Fund Scotland, and I was struck by the very wide range of recipients, and I was also struck by the number of individual vessels which are either being bought or are being upgraded with these grants. And it struck me, I was wondering, do you think that this level of investment and the need for this investment from the Marine Fund suggests that at the moment the industry is really struggling and may actually be unsustainable if in fact it cannot afford to invest in itself?
Well, I think the industry does invest in itself, and when you think if your boat's beginning to come towards the end of its life and needs renewing, that's a huge investment by the vessel owners, which now, because of not being in the EU, they don't get grants for that anymore, I think, or certainly not to the level that they did previously. And it's really good to see yet another round of these grants, because as you read them out, Andrew, I was thinking, well, that leads to more sustainably doing something that is more environmentally friendly. And it is a very important industry for Scotland, and especially our rural and remote communities. And they have got to be sustainable for the whole community to be sustainable. And, it's been a real struggle, particularly for the fishing industry since we left Europe. And if there's help being given for uh, businesses that are looking for new markets in Asia and elsewhere, I think that's really commendable and a good use of taxpayers' money, and good use in what the government, in the way that the government has distributed that money.
Thank you, Maureen. And as it happens, I was in Malig on Monday and was struck by how very few boats there were in the harbour. Now, I recognise that the fleet might have been at sea, so I asked. There were a number of fishing industry people I was meeting, and I asked, and I was told that there are very few operating from Malig now. And I was also told that, if anything, the situation in big fishing communities like Buckie is even worse. So, if the fishing industry is to survive, and let alone to thrive, and with it the coastal communities of which it is such a fundamental part, then is it the case that there's going to have to, in fact, be an awful lot more done and a great deal more invested?
I think that's a difficult one. There maybe are economies of scale to be had in the big ports. Peterhead has recently had a new fish market. Well, in the past few years, had a new fish market. So maybe more of the boats will take their catches into where the buyers are. I'm not sufficiently au fait with that to to tell you what's happening one way or another. But you still get the little boats that go out from harbours further own wee catch and for supplying local restaurants and things further down the coast, for example, in Aberdeenshire and Angus. Um, but it is where it, well, of course, Mallaig and places used to have the big herring fleets come in, and that's gone too now. So it's difficult to know what the best way forward is, but it's up to the communities themselves to decide and to apply for money where grants are available.
Of course, of course. Thank you, Maureen. Now, I'm looking at the time and I'm remembering, as we said at the top of the programme, that it's St Andrew's Day today. So, first of all, here's a short clip of our friend Professor Murray Pittock of the University of Glasgow talking about our patron saint, St Andrew.
St Andrew is Scotland's patron saint, but he's also the patron saint of a large number of other countries, including the Ukraine, Romania, Greece, Barbados, and he was the patron saint of Prussia before the German Empire was created in 1871. So St Andrew's got around a bit, but one of the interesting things about his role in Scotland's national story is the legendary account of St Regulus or St Rule bringing St Andrew's bones to Scotland and founding what became St Andrews, funnily enough, is probably an adaptation of the reality, which is that the Bishop of Hexham, Acca, brought St Andrew's bones to Scotland when the large part of the east coast of Scotland was under partial or entire Northumbrian control in the 8th century. So in a sense, the story of St Andrew is a story of a Northumbrian, an Anglo-Saxon gift to Scotland. But of course it became subsequently a sign of Scottish nationality, legendarily so, at the Battle of Athelstan Ford, in which, looking at a saltire in the sky, the Scottish king agreed to make St Andrew the patron saint of the whole of Scotland. One of the things that actually we don't do so much anymore, that we used to do on St Andrew's Day, was celebrate burn suppers that replaced St Andrew's Day dinners. St Andrew's Day dinners were widespread until the 19th and 20th century, early 20th century. They survived longest among St Andrew's societies in the British Empire. And for Scots in exile in continental Europe in the 18th century, they were associated with Scottish music, Scottish dress, probably Scottish dancing, and Scottish produce. So St Andrew's, the celebrations of St Andrew's Day is something we no longer carry out as much as we used to do. But St Andrew has in one sense or another been celebrated as Scotland's patron saint since the 8th or early 9th century AD, since Acca of Hexham brought those bones to Scotland.
And thanks to Murray Pittock for talking to us this evening about St Andrew. So, Maureen, as Murray was saying, we share St Andrew as a patron saint with many other countries, cities, islands, and regions. Areas that have adopted him, as Murray said, include Barbados, Cyprus, Greece, Romania, Russia, Ukraine, Tenerife, and Amalfi in Italy. So, I was wondering, does that maybe underline the internationalist nature of Scotland and the Scots to you, that we happily and enthusiastically share a patron saint with so many other countries?
Yes, there's some on that list that I had not realised before. But yes, I mean, it's absolutely great that St Andrew, who was one of the 12 apostles, so is special in that sense, is our patron saint. And, he's right about we don't have St Andrew's dinners as much as we did before, or indeed we have burn suppers. And I think that, since St Andrew's Day is now a public holiday, and as we go forward to independence, I'm sure we should be making St Andrew's Day, well, it is already a public holiday, but not every business recognise it as such, although public service does. But I think we should be making St Andrew's Day and Burns Day public holidays in our new independent calendar of public holidays. And perhaps then we'll get
Maureen,
more St Andrew's dinners, a bit like Thanksgiving dinner at this time of year.
that's a very good point, and I think we could share those dinners. Out of that list of countries, I'm reminded, of course, that Barbados, because of the connection with St Andrew, it celebrates Barbados's Independence Day is the 30th of November. So I think there's lots of ways, and of course, to your point, I'm reminded that Burns Night overlaps with Indian Independence Day in January. So there's lots of celebrations to be had, which might well underline the internationalist nature of Scotland and the Scots. Thank you, Maureen. But I'm afraid that is all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to develop the station and to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new supporters to enable us to employ staff who will make new programmes for you. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. You can find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. And when you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform and click on the little bell emoji in order that you are reminded when we're broadcasting. So we will be here again tomorrow evening at 7 with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come back and join us then. I'd like to thank everyone who has been watching, and I'd like to say a very special thanks to our very special guest, Maureen Watt. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure, and sorry for having a coughing fit.
Well, so long as it's clear now, that's the important thing. Now, I was reminded that it's not only St Andrew's Day today. I was struck by what else has happened on the 30th of November. In 1292, John Balliol was crowned King of Scotland at Scone. In 1335, at the Battle of Kilbleen near Ballater, that saw the defeat of Edward Balliol's forces by Sir Andrew Murray. In 1872, the world's first football international was played between Scotland and England, ending in a goalless draw. In 1923, we saw the death of John Maclean, the revolutionary socialist politician who played such an important part in the Red Clydeside movement. And in 1996, the then Conservative government, under John Major and the Secretary of State for Scotland, Mickey Forsyth, returned the Stone of Destiny from Westminster Abbey to Edinburgh Castle, where it was put on display beside the honours of Scotland. Now, to mark St Andrew's Day, we will play out this evening with a performance by our friends Hugh Stewart and Greg McCara. Bye-bye.
Scots were gay wi' Wallace bled, Scots won bruised as art and lead. Welcome to your gory bed, or to victory. Now's the day and now's the hour, see the front, old battle hour, see approach proud Edward's power, chains and slavery. War would be a traitor knave, war would fill a coward's grave, war sae base as be a slave, let him turn and flee. War's for Scotland's king and law, freeman's sword will strongly draw, freeman stand or freeman fall, let him follow me. By oppression's woes and pains, by your sons in servile chains, we will drain our dearest veins, but we shall be free. Lay the proud usurpers low, tyrants fall in every foe, liberties in every blow. Let us day or day. Scots wha hae wi Wallace bled, Scots wha Bruce has oft times led. Welcome to your gory bed, or to victory.